housing, but also now being able to pivot to affordable commercial space. So I think we'll probably have some questions for you. So I'd like to move on to our last speaker, Christopher Mitchell. This is me. So Christopher Mitchell is the director of the Community Broadband Networks Initiative with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in Minneapolis. Christopher is a leading national expert on community networks and internet access. On a day-to-day basis, he runs muninetworks.org, the comprehensive online clearinghouse of information about local government policies to improve internet access. Their interactive community broadband network tracks more than 500 such networks. He also hosts podcasts, including Community Broadband Bits and Building Local Power. Christopher will be talking to us tonight about how community broadband can help small business during the pandemic, as well as contribute to more small business development overall. Christopher?
Great, thank you. And as soon as you start screen sharing, it changes your controls around to make it harder to unmute. Let me put this into proper mode. And I share Tony's enthusiasm for the other panelists. This has been a very good night to sit here and get a sense of what's going on with everyone. Really good ideas. You get a sense that we probably could solve a lot of the problems that we have if we put our minds to it with a lot of these solutions. I'm going to talk about broadband today, and the way I like to start is by digging into sort of put us on the common page, and that is that the internet should act like other utilities. I'm not really making an argument here about how it should be regulated or anything, but just in concept, people go out to a store, they buy an appliance, they come at home and they plug it in. They don't really have to worry whether or not they're going to have to unplug their toaster or unplug a light bulb in order to use the toaster. It just kind of works. You don't have to be an expert in it. And that's where we should get with broadband. It is not where we are. I would echo Donna's comments in terms of small business owners may not be super sophisticated. They don't want to have to deal with a lot of these issues. In terms of broadband being super complicated, they just want this to work for their businesses. So I think that's the first thing, is that we shouldn't have to talk about megabits. People shouldn't have to become a technical expert. We can make this stuff work the way other utilities have. So the other thing I wanted to set a common agreement on is understanding how we think about broadband, because as we talk about broadband and speeds, naturally we may think about devices, but the way the Federal Communications Commission decides what the minimum standard for broadband should be for something to be considered fast enough for being called broadband is how a household uses it. And households have a lot of devices now. So as we're talking about whether or not different speeds are appropriate, whether you're talking about an individual or a small business, it's important to understand that small businesses probably will have multiple people using it simultaneously, just like households do. They may be hosting guest Wi-Fi as well. And so they have much larger needs than you may expect. And so don't think of this as what you need one connection to do for a single device, but rather what one connection, it has to support many different devices. And then the last piece of my intro comments is again, just as applicable to households as it is to businesses. And that's to say that most of the networks that are available to businesses, just like households, are asymmetrical. They're built to deliver content to you from big companies often, but more largely from the internet. And they're not designed to allow you to contribute as much content back. And that's really a problem for small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses. They're often getting very similar technology to you in your household. And so, they may want to download a fair amount. I make the joke that, I could watch Smokey and the Bandit every week, but that wouldn't tell you very much about how I wanted to use my internet connection. But this is the argument that the cable and telephone companies use when they're designing their networks or when they're arguing about regulation, is that people, businesses, and households download a lot more content than they upload. Well, I'm not going to be uploading Smokey and the Bandit once a week. I am going to be uploading files. And I personally, as a person who runs a small business, a sports photography business I've run for 15 years, I pay for a higher level of service from the cable company so that I can have a faster upload. It also gives me a faster download, and that's what they advertise. But fundamentally, I don't really care about that. I care about the upload. And so as we talk about municipal networks in this presentation, one of the things to keep in mind is that they have a different mindset than the big corporate networks. One of the ways that's manifest is they're very happy, and they often prefer to do symmetrical networks that will allow you to upload much more than you can on the cable and the telephone networks. And in part, that's because they're specifically trying to encourage local businesses to be able to thrive, for people to work from home, for kids to have great education at home. So all of these things are interrelated. But the important thing to remember from this is just that what a person does with their connection over the course of a month doesn't necessarily tell you a lot about how they need to use it. There's a lot that's lost in mismeasurements right now in terms of how we understand how people and businesses use their connections. So the Institute for Local Self-Reliance was described briefly by Kennedy. As you can tell from Kennedy's work, we have a lot of interesting focuses and we do a lot of great work, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that right now. The Institute has a website called muninetworks.org, which tracks municipal network efforts across the nation. We have a variety of multimedia products to make it clear what they're doing and how communities can build on them, build their own networks, learn lessons, and that sort of a thing. One of the things we've done is mapped community networks. Now, the rural cooperative networks are the ones that you see in the orange and purple. And the green ones are the municipal fiber networks. And it's worth noting that the municipal fiber networks probably cover more people than the orange and the purple networks. It's just the issue of density. But more broadly, we have community networks across this nation that have done a lot of the hard work that we need to get both our businesses and our residents connected. And a lot of people don't understand just how much community networks have done around the nation, but it's really quite impressive what these different business models have done. We've also just identified some specific communities served. These are mostly the municipal networks here. We have a map in which you can toggle on different types of networks, but there's a lot of different varieties. I'm going to talk about a couple of them specifically here with relation to the small businesses that we're interested in. But the important thing to understand is that all different kinds of communities have engaged in different strategies. And there's a variety of different approaches, but there's well over 800 communities that we're tracking. 300 of them are served by electric cooperatives. About 550 now are municipal networks where the city has built a network. About 150 of them nearly at this point are probably citywide. And the rest of them are partial networks in which the city has built fiber out to a business district or some kind of pilot project. But there's impressive number of different approaches that we've cataloged. These are just the citywide networks. The gold is where you see the municipal fiber, and the silver are older networks, often networks that are more than 15 years old, 20 years old now, that are using older cable technology, and those are upgrading into fiber networks as we speak. The rest are the partial networks and the dark fiber networks that are available. And again, there's quite a different variety of varieties. They're in conservative towns, liberal towns, all variety of places. And then one of the things I like to note is that these networks are remarkably successful, despite the fact that they don't serve nearly as many people as the biggest cable and telephone companies. When you look at the fastest internet service companies in the nation, the fastest one this most recent year was Cedar Falls, Iowa, which is its own municipal network. Coming in fourth is Nextlight, which is a municipal network in Colorado, Longmont. And EPB, I think, is number 6, which is Chattanooga's network. And then of the other ones that are private companies, most of those actually have partnerships with municipal networks for some of their deployments. And so we see smart municipal involvement in a majority. I think it's actually 8 out of 10 of the fastest networks in the nation, which I think is just stunning, frankly, given that the big cable and telephone companies are consistently trying to tell us that this is an approach that is doomed to failure. The One of the stories I want to throw in initially is Mount Vernon, Washington, which is a small town in which they built a fiber network that connects just businesses and allows multiple internet service companies to compete on that network. So businesses have their choice of different companies to get service from across a fiber network that is owned by the city. It's kind of like the city builds the roads and multiple trucking companies, FedEx, UPS, the Postal Service, they all use those roads on equal terms to establish a proper market. Now, Mount Vernon started pulling businesses out of Seattle because the fiber network was so good. The New York Times did a story on them. And one of the businesses said, well, one of the things I really like about Mount Vernon is that in my old service, if I got something go wrong, I'd have to wait online, wait on the phone forever to get a solution. Now, if something goes wrong, I walk out down the street, I walk over a block, and I talk to the people who are running it, and they fix it. And that's really nice. So I think one of the things to keep in mind is that these technologies are not equal when they're run by a local entity. Much like home ownership may be different when it's a Wall Street backed private equity group versus a community land trust, for instance. But an example I'd like to use comes out of photography, because that's what I do on the side. When you shoot sports professionally, one of the things people will say is, that's a really great camera you got there. You must have an incredible camera. And photographers hate this. They really hate it. And so we get snarky and we say things like, yeah, I got my camera where Shakespeare bought his pens, where LeBron and Steph Curry shop for shoes, where Lance Armstrong got his bike. And it turns out this is a perfect example. It really was about the technology. It really, it wasn't about the bike. And the reason that I bring this up is because if you look at the technology that municipal fiber networks use and how it impacts the community, Verizon Fios uses the exact same technology that Chattanooga used, and the results couldn't be more different because of the incentives of who is operating it. So if you look at Chattanooga, they've generated thousands of jobs with that municipal network. They've attracted businesses from all over. They've allowed local businesses to thrive in ways that they would not have seen if they had just convinced Verizon to build a slightly better network in their town. And when I went to Chattanooga, when they launched this network about 10 years ago now, I met people who had moved to Chattanooga to launch their next great business rather than San Francisco, because they wanted that high-tech environment in a place like Chattanooga. I think this is really relevant as we think about this, and I share Kennedy's frustration and anger, as well as sadness, at what's happening to small businesses. But one of the things to grapple with is that the impact on commercial real estate is going to be dramatic. And one of the things that I think cities and communities, counties have to reckon with is, how are they going to be attractive in an era when you might be able to find space just about anywhere to launch your business? Do you have all of the attractions that you need in order to make sure your businesses can thrive, both existing businesses and the businesses you want to attract from out of town? 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right around, I guess it was 2008, during the Great Recession, Santa Monica had built a municipal fiber network that allowed them to make sure that a lot of the commercial spaces had super high quality networking. We're talking 10 gigabits in a time in which nobody was even talking about 1 gigabit. And one of the things they found was that when they did proper comparisons across the LA metro area, their vacancy rates were much lower. And part of it was because they attributed it to the fiber network that was really attracting businesses and keeping them there. They kept it simple. If something went wrong, they would fix it quickly. The prices were transparent. People really don't like playing games, whether they're small business owners, whether they're residents. And so I want to talk briefly about different models. One would be like Santa Monica, in which the city itself may offer a service, similar with Chattanooga. You live in those places, you offer, or you can take service from the local government, which operates services directly. May even run a cable company. Or like the approach in Mount Vernon in Washington, the city may build an infrastructure and allow multiple people to compete on that. The largest such network like that is Utopia in Utah. And Utopia has, I think, 12, 15 different networks now competing on it. And there's a new model that's developing, the Ammon Fiber model out of Idaho. And we're going to see, I think, 10 to 20 of these networks popping up in the next several years using these models, in which we're going to see really robust competition and next generation services, some of which are really going to make it a lot easier for local businesses to compete. I think it's going to take a lot of the complication out of how they have to manage their networks. They may even provide services that they can't get today. There's going to be a lot of innovation in places that have these kinds of networks where they enable them. But one of the things I think is important to understand as I'm going through this is that this isn't easy. Counties have to take it very seriously, study it deeply, and then as you implement it, and I think this is something that's often missed, it has to be accessible both to the small business owners that want to take service, as well as the ISPs. You need to have contracts that are very basic, that don't require a team of corporate lawyers to understand and get through. And that's a real challenge for local governments. So as you're crafting this, don't let that get in the way. Some of the dark fiber leases that we would have as models are 2 or 3 pages long from local governments. And one is from St. Louis Park here in Minnesota that we're often sharing, because that's what you need in order to make this work. The final thing I wanted to note is something that I know has also been an issue in the Arlington area, and that is public housing connectivity. And having your own fiber infrastructure can really improve access, particularly for people in apartment buildings and public housing. And I think it's important to make sure that we're not forgetting them. The more that we're able to make sure that they're connected, the better off we're all going to do. And one of the things I saw that was really interesting that I really want to see more research on is, I believe it was in New York City, as they improved access in public housing, they found a shockingly high amount of new business formation that was coming in those areas. And I think, for those of us that don't work regularly with that population, it's sort of surprising, but there's probably really good reasons for that. And making sure that our public housing is connected should be seen as an important part of making sure that you're allowing for entrepreneurialism, and also just well connecting people who may be some of the patrons of the local businesses that would be using it. So I tried to cram a lot in there, and I really hope in the Q&A we can answer any further questions. So thank you, Tim, and thank you everyone else from the organizations putting this on today. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That was a great presentation. So I want to turn it over actually to do some Q&A, and I see people are already kind of dropping some questions. If you'd like to ask a question directly yourself, please just write Q in the chat, and we'll try to get to people as in order of turn. Maya, did you want to ask the first question that we got that was pre-submitted?
Yeah, so we received quite a few pre-submitted questions. I think one question that I think is probably top of mind for a lot of